Hello everyone, this is Amit Goswami, quantum physicist, consciousness researcher and quantum activist. In this series, I want to present the idea that quantum science is giving us a worldview that is so integrated with the spiritual tradition that developed in India 5,000 years ago, and then all over the world. That same spiritual idea sprang up in various places in different times. And even today, this spiritual enlightenment that is the basis of the spiritual worldview, that is a very common phenomenon. Even today, people declare that they see the world indeed in the same way that was described by the sages that defined sacred books called Upanishads in India. And let's go back to the statement that I made in the beginning. Quantum physics is giving us scientific exposition to that same idea. This is enormous. This is very, very wonderful news because we know that there are two distinct voices in the way human beings have been able to express their most noble ideas, and these two voices are the voices of the spiritual traditions. Sometimes it's denigrated as mysticism. The word suggests that it's mysterious, not to be very much trusted, but that denigration is completely unnecessary if we find that yes, those ideas are also very compatible with modern science. Now, if you have not heard the word quantum, let me just tell you the complete truth. Science is now quantum science. There is no science that can avoid quantum science. Quantum physics is the latest physics. Anyone who thinks otherwise is mistaken. So having said that, and having said that the two worldviews are converging, integrating, then on what basis? I'll tell you the statement of quantum worldview. Consciousness is the ground of all being. Yes, you heard me right. Consciousness is the ground of all being. Now, if you don't know Upanishads, you probably will not be familiar with the statement, but this is the statement that Upanishads make. Sarvam Khalidam Brahman. Now, those are Sanskrit words. You may not be aware of the meaning of those words. It just means everything is Brahman. And what is Brahman? Brahman is defined by three words: Sat, Chit, and Anand. Now again, these are also Sanskrit words. So many problems arise in terms of what those words meant, and different people interpret in different ways. And of course, therefore, some controversy can be generated. But I think everybody will agree that Sat has something to do with truth. The common word for truth in India today is Satya. You see the similarity of Satya with Sat. So if we say Sat is truth or Sat is law, one of the things about truth, fundamentality of truth, science has already discovered in the form of the fundamentality of scientific truth, which we call laws. And This is expressed also in other spiritual traditions like Christianity, which says in the beginning there is word, which is another word which signifies this idea, truth, law. So if we say in the beginning there is scientific law, and then we say that the scientific law is quantum science, which is what modern science has discovered. So you see, in the beginning there is the scientific law that consciousness is the ground of all being. Sarvam Khalidam Brahman. If you still have doubts, let's go back to Sat, Chit and Ananda. And you have doubt because you didn't hear the word consciousness anywhere. So consciousness is introduced in Sat, Chit, Ananda in the word Chit. And again, human nature, how to interpret language. So people translate Chit in many different ways. But I think all people will agree that probably Chit means awareness, conscious awareness. Conscious awareness is different from the word consciousness. When we have conscious awareness, we experience the world as a subject, looking at objects. So this conscious awareness can also be thought of as a subject-object consciousness. Consciousness is a oneness that splits up into this polarity of subject looking at an object. And this is what we experience. This is what defines the human being or any living being. We experience the world as a subject looking at the world. Subject separate from object. Two poles of experience. Now you see more connection with Sarvam Khalidam Brahman, and consciousness is the ground of all being. But of course, the Upanishadic description of Brahman goes further. Sat, scientific law, defines what comes next, which is Chit, which is the law of how consciousness breaks up into subject-object split. And then the Upanishadic word Brahman gives us the further idea. What is the future of that breaking up? Why does it break up? The Upanishads declare Ananda. The objective of Chit is to produce Ananda. What is Ananda? If we look at the word Ananda, it comes from the word Ananta. Sound familiar? You know what Anta means? Boundary. Ananta means no boundary. No boundary. When we have this no boundary, then we experience consciousness, an experience that is called joy. You can distinguish it from ordinary joy as saying spiritual joy, but no need. As soon as you are distinguishing joy from what we ordinarily call pleasure, which is either neutral about consciousness or sometimes even produce a contraction of consciousness, joy is connected with expansion of consciousness. So why do we have Chit? We have Chit because we want to experience states of more and more expanded consciousness. So the Sanskrit word Brahman is so evocative that it not only defines how consciousness comes to us through the word, through the scientific law, through quantum science, which gives us the law of how the unity can break up into a subject looking at an object, our usual conscious experience that we call awareness. And then, what's the objective of all this? The word itself defines it. It's Ananda, to get into states of higher and higher joy. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Because not only the journey becomes very clear, not only our existence becomes very clear, who we are becomes very clear, we also get a clear indication of where we are going. You know about evolution. This is another discovery of modern science that we didn't know in ancient times. But we did know in ancient times. We were just not so explicit. By saying that the objective of Chit is Ananda, we are saying that Chit can evolve. You all know that ordinarily we experience Chit, this awareness, in a state that we call the ego. The ego is very individual. Ego is usually very contract. The word Ananda in the defining word Brahman is telling us that this very constricted consciousness of the ego can find greater and greater expression of Ananda. That expansion of consciousness, can that be captured in quantum science? So in this series, I'll show that all the ways that the expansion of consciousness was seen in the Upanishads and then explicated in the Indian tradition by the well-known treatise called Bhagavad Gita and the very well-known treatise as well of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. This tradition, and the latest explicator of that tradition is Sri Aurobindo, who wrote very wonderful books himself, one of them, The Life Divine. I'll show that when you combine all this Indian thought with quantum physics, you get a complete rendition of what is this human being, or what is this being that evolves from a single cell creature that came about 3.8 billion years ago on this planet Earth, and then evolved and evolved and evolved, became human being, and that human being is going to evolve also to further reaches of higher and higher consciousness. This wonderful image is contained in the Upanishads. So, how exciting is that? But let me go back to further beginnings of the things. The reason we need to explain more is that some of you are not even familiar with the idea of quantum physics. Quantum physics says one fundamental thing about objects that is very different than how you see objects. You see objects in a way that can be called things. Objects are things. What do we mean by things? They're concrete things. A book, a pencil, a chair, a table, a stone. Those are objects. Concrete. And then it is very difficult to see that what this has to do with quantum physics, where it says quantum objects are objects of possibilities. You heard me right. They are objects of possibilities. What kind of objects of possibility? They're called waves of possibility. Two very jarring concepts. One is wave, very different from objects looked upon as things. Objects looked upon as things can be much better described by saying that objects are particles. Their model is grain of sand, or if you want to imagine a bigger object that has that concreteness, that has that locality, the fixity, you may think of billiard balls. That's a scientist's favorite image of what an object is in what we call Newtonian physics. Can you think of a billiard ball as a wave of possibility? No way. Billiard ball, you throw it, it's moving, but it's still describing a trajectory. The object is always one place at a time. That's the way particles behave. Whereas quantum objects are waves. Waves are very distinct from particles because they are in different places at the same time. Verify that, please. Throw a pebble in a pond if you can when the next pond comes in your view, and see how the water wave, although you are creating it just at a point, how that water wave spreads into concentric circles and becoming bigger and bigger, and how the wave is everywhere on a crest line. So waves can be in more than one place at the same time, whereas particles are just the opposite, only one place at a time. So when quantum physics came about, everybody thought this kind of thing is a paradox. So concepts grew that quantum physics cannot be understood, or somebody said quantum physics is very mysterious. And this kind of concept dominated the scientists for some time. Some people even speculated that quantum physics is just a mathematical framework which is useful but has no philosophical consequences that we should take seriously. All kinds of thinking. But something kept physicists thinking about these problematic paradoxes, as they're called. And what we found is very astounding. Can be said in one word: consciousness has to get into the description of physics. One word is consciousness. It has to get in the description of physics. That's the message. Waves and particles cannot belong to the description of the same object if we hold on to the idea that we have only one domain of reality. Impossible. What is the resolution of the paradox that the same object is wave and particle? The resolution is astounding. Waves are waves in a domain outside of space and time where the objects are particles. And we get the astounding phenomenon that we have to agree with, that there are two domains of reality. Although the other domain is not visible to us, although it is a fact that we experience only the domain of space and time, but there is a domain beyond our experience. What should we call this domain? In quantum physics, the description is clear. We say that domain is a domain of potentiality or possibility. The waves of quantum physics are waves of possibility. This is where the statement comes: quantum objects are waves of possibility. What is the connection with particles? When we experience these waves, when we measure these waves, when we observe these waves, they become particles. So, domain of potentiality, where the waves reside, and domain of actuality, that manifests when we experience the waves through measurement or observation. This concept is an essential part of quantum science. We cannot understand quantum physics without introducing the concept of quantum measurement. Now, science, the way it developed, modern science, has become very constricted in its thinking because it's much simpler to conceive the world as just one thing, one domain of reality. And people have become much used to that concept. And basically, the spiritual position or mystical position has become very foreign to us because we have become used to this veil that the scientists have created, that who needs this other domain of reality that spiritual traditions are proposing. They are always talking about some mysterious entity called God. Upanishads at least talked about something that is conceptually a little mysterious. But when the word God is introduced, it's not even a little mysterious. In the way that religions use the concept of God, God seems to be an emperor sitting on a throne in some domain that we call the transcendent domain, and we human beings live in an immanent domain. And then people give very picturesque names to this transcendent domain, call it heaven, and this is earth. And this picture has become such a corrupted picture. We imagine an emperor sitting on a throne, and then that emperor can be a white man or can be a other kinds of color or whatever shape or form you give it, depending on the culture you live. And it becomes everybody's God for themselves, and we fight about whose God is the right God. This happens because we are not thinking in a scientific way. When we start thinking about all these things in a scientific way, this is what quantum physics are enabling us to do. We find very simple, at once tractable ideas. Yes, we do have two domains of reality, but let's see what we have in that other domain that we do not see. Quantum physics tells us very clearly that look, don't create mysterious words. All we know is that this is the domain where objects are potentiality. Objects are waves of possibility. And then big discovery comes from quantum physics itself. In that domain, three physicists, Albert Einstein, very famous name, you know about him, and two of his collaborators, Nathan Rosen and Boris Podolsky. These three people, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, they discovered an astounding thing. If two objects of potentiality come close together and interact, they showed that they use the word correlated. They develop a correlation between them. Correlation. In modern times, there is another evocative name that is given to this state of correlation, entanglement. They become entangled. But of course, we are just creating words. What does it mean? It means an astounding thing. These two objects can communicate instantly. Yes, these two objects can communicate instantly. Why is that surprising? Because we know that in space and time, no objects can communicate instantly with another. Why? Because the speed of communication has a limit. The speed limit is called the speed of light. Nothing can communicate faster than the speed of light. This is also a scientific law. Much confusion is created if you make it a scientific law and then you say that no, two objects can communicate instantly in quantum physics. Your first tendency would be to say quantum physics is wrong. But no, quantum physics is not saying that. Quantum physics is saying that in the domain of potentiality, two objects can communicate faster than the speed of light or instantly. So there is no violation of the scientific law that no object can travel faster than the speed of light. Communication takes place via signals. So if we say communication instantaneous, that just means that this is signal-less communication. We call it non-local communication. Communication in space and time takes place via signals, which does have a speed limit. Communication in the domain of potentiality, on the other hand, is not through signals between two objects who are correlated, and therefore the communication is instantaneous. Very simple. But notice another aspect of this situation. When two objects are communicating instantly, is there an underlying unity between them? You bet. I can always communicate with me instantly. Is there any doubt about it? So, instant communication implies oneness. Now do you realize how big this particular message is? This domain of potentiality is a domain of potential unity, one consciousness. And now that statement we started with makes more and more sense. This oneness. Is this what Brahman is implying? When we say reality is something called Brahman, one and one thing. Isn't this oneness what we are talking about? The final idea, of course, is that why should we call this oneness consciousness? Indeed, initially when this idea of oneness came about, scientists gave it many very objective names. Like one popular objective name is quantum field. But yes, you can call the oneness quantum field, but it gives the idea that this oneness is an object. And you know what? This is wrong. This is not complete. Very simple. Try to define an act of measurement. When does a measurement happen? You think about it. An object of potentiality is measured by what? By another object of potentiality, right? You can think of these objects as cameras, which takes a photograph, or more technical names like objects of the nature of elementary particles like electrons, we measure through Geiger counters, or sophisticated name like cloud chamber, where we take a photograph of the electron, sophisticated camera. Whatever name we call it, it's going to be a measuring apparatus. And then you ask the question, is that defined? Does that define a measurement? And you realize an astounding thing. No, the measuring apparatus is also made of these quantum objects, which are waves of possibility until they have been measured, right? So they are really also potentiality. So this measuring apparatus and what you are measuring, both are potentialities. You cannot make a thing out of potentiality. You cannot make an object out of potential objects. You cannot make just a particle out of all these waves of possibility. It's impossible to reduce, because an interaction between possibility and possibility will give you only more possibility. This was first pointed out by the great physicist, mathematician von Neumann, and it is sometimes stated as a theorem. No material interaction between a measuring apparatus or anything with another piece of matter is going to give you a reduction of possibility into actuality, or never going to reduce a wave of possibility into a particle. In other words, a measuring apparatus coupled to a quantum object cannot define a measurement, a reduction of the wave nature into particle. So we say that an observer is needed for defining quantum measurement. Still there is confusion. What defines an observer? What is different about an observer? Aren't we just the brain? a collection of elementary particles making up atoms, making up molecules, making up neurons, the cells in the brain. Isn't that what an observer is? Then how is that different from that assertion that we made about a Geiger counter or a camera? The brain seems to be as much a collection of elementary particles as a camera or an ordinary measuring apparatus. What is different? That's the point. This paradox of what is different about the brain tells us that our supposition that the brain is everything is incomplete, is wrong. We have to correct that. There is something called observership. I will use the word subject. Brain somehow has become the subject of the experience, and this is not in the brain looked upon as a material apparatus. Not in the brain. Brain looked upon as a material apparatus is a material apparatus. There is no subject or consciousness in it. So we see that consciousness must come from it, not from the brain, not intrinsically, but extrinsically. And here, of course, there is a big problem. If we introduce consciousness as a separate entity, as a separate world, and think that that consciousness is using the brain, we get into a philosophical problem which is called how does that separate entity, consciousness, a different world, completely different in structure and texture and constituents, interact with this material world. In other words, it has to be a non-material world of consciousness, and non-material world interacting with material world. This philosophy is called dualism. That has the problem of how two things can interact, communicate, which has nothing in communality. No, nothing in common, nothing in communality. Huge problem. And that's how that thinking that I started this with, that consciousness is the ground of all being, that thinking is the essential component of understanding the whole situation of quantum physics. That thinking that is identical with Sarvam Khalidam Brahman. All is Brahman, all is one entity only. And the final connection is this statement. The domain of potentiality is nothing but this consciousness. Consciousness is the ground of all being, where matter consists of potentiality of consciousness. This is the final rendition that solves all our thinking paradoxes. We think paradox because we have not conceptualized correctly. We have not conceptualized consciousness this way before. In the mystical thinking, what was lacking is the word potentiality. In the scientific thinking, what was lacking is the word consciousness. We put these two things together and immediately clarity dawns. Consciousness is the domain of all being. Consciousness is the ground of all being, where quantum possibilities are possibilities of consciousness itself. When consciousness chooses one facet of these possibility waves, that facet is experienced as an object. That's the particle. Consciousness splits up in the process as a subject. In the process of measurement, consciousness identifies with the brain. And that identity of consciousness with the brain is what we call the subject. How does the brain acquire a subject or a self? This puzzle is removed by saying that consciousness identifies with it. Brain is a potentiality as much as an electron is a potentiality of consciousness. When consciousness picks up this oneness that it is in the domain of potentiality, it becomes two. One part identifies itself with the brain and looks at objects separate from itself. Isn't this conceptualization simply wonderful? I hope you feel the excitement of it. All that truth that was contained in the statement, Sarvam Kalidam Brahman, is being rediscovered in science in this statement. Consciousness is the ground of all being, in which matter exists as potentialities of consciousness to choose from. To choose from. We are very puzzled about the concept of how another reality, non-material reality, can interact with matter. Nothing in common. Now we have solved that problem of dualism. No, there is no dualism in reality. Reality is one and only. It is only consciousness, only Brahman. Brahman looks at Brahman and splits up. Is that possible? It is a bit confusing, isn't it? Brahman looks at Brahman and splits up. So the splitting up must be an appearance, and this has created a lot of confusion in the mystical traditions. What should we call this appearance? What should we call this appearance? Is what we experience just appearance and therefore trivial? Or is the appearance the objective of the whole thing? I said in the beginning, there is the word, there is the scientific law. If the appearance is part of a scientific law, and then the appearance is the objective for us to experience greater and greater expansion, giving us greater and greater joy, then obviously calling this appearance trivial does not make any sense. Or we can take the view that there is no law and therefore this splitting up of consciousness is a triviality and you should just ignore it. This is an idea that we will explicate upon in the next part of this series. Thank you. A question came from the audience that when we look at a banana leaf, and it indeed is very evocative that you were looking at a banana leaf in this picture, because I am sitting in front of a banana tree. So it's a very legitimate question. What am I looking at? Is there a banana tree or not when I am not looking? Astoundingly, quantum physics says that until we look, there is no banana tree. There is only potentiality of the banana tree and the banana leaf. And this becomes a little bit intolerable, doesn't it? A physicist wrote an article which became very famous in many circles in the United States called "Is the Moon There When We Are Not Looking at It?" Very evocative article, just as this question from the audience. Is the banana leaf there when we are not looking at it? Quantum physics says squarely. Yes, banana leaf is there, but as potentiality. It becomes actuality in our experience, a manifest banana leaf only when we look. So there is another question from the audience, a rejoinder. Is human beings the only beings on this earth which can create such an experience of actuality? And here again, it's a very important question. I think I implicitly said before that life evolves and this capacity of experiencing the world separate from ourselves, the capacity is inherent even in the first living cell. So quantum physics is better off if we assume that. Is that assumption justified? Later on, it will be a little bit later on because many more concepts will be needed to completely explain this. Yes, this assumption is necessary. If we don't assume this, the whole assertion cannot be fitted with all the experimental data. Experimental data demands that not only we assert that human beings can cause a quantum measurement, but also that even a single living cell can cause a distinction between subject and object, and therefore a quantum measurement. This is fundamental. Thank you for the question. A third question has come from the audience. Is the eye the only sensory organ with which we can precipitate a quantum measurement? And again, this is a very, very good question. So when we say observe, we are just implying a measurement. Observation can cause a measurement, hearing can cause a measurement, any of our sensory organ can give us an experience and cause a measurement. Yes, this is a very, very important recognition that you have to have. We call it observation out of habit. That's the easiest way that we experience the world as separate from ourselves. But indeed, if I close my eyes and hear something, the distinction is again taking place. I hear something, the distinction of I and that something, that is also a subject-object split. I taste something, that is also a subject-object split. I touch something, I smell something, the same way. So whenever a subject-object split is taking place, we say quantum measurement is taking place, for which we synonymously use the word observation. So don't think of observation as limited to an optical observation, but take it a more general way of observing with any of the five senses.